Hey YouTube, Mr. Terry back here once again with another History Teacher Reacts video. Today we're doing another oversimplified video, but this one is on the Falklands. And this was recommended by a bunch of people in the comment sections of my other videos. And just a reminder, if there are things that you would like to see, put that in the comments. And especially if it gets a lot of support, I'll look to check that out. All right. Okay, as always, with the reaction video, I always want to make sure that I give credit to the original creators. So down below in the description, you'll find a link to the original video. Make sure that if you like this video, that you go over there and give them your like and subscribe and give them the support that they deserve. All right. With that being said, I think we'll go ahead and get started.
Hi, English mariner John Strong. Hi, Anthony Carey, 5th Viscount of Falkland. I would very much like for you to go to Chile and locate the wreck of a Spanish treasure ship for me. Okay.
Okay. All right. So it's a treasure voyage. Got the British heading down to
Hey, I found some islands.
Argentina. All right.
The English were probably
Starts
not
with
the first to
claims,
discover
right?
the Falklands, but they were the first to write it down. They found it to be cold, wet, and miserable. Just like home. So they established a colony in 1765, unaware that the French had also discovered the islands and done the same a year earlier. And for a while, the two were unaware of each other's existence until presumably.
And you think about 1760s here, this is a very continued tempestuous time between the British and the French, you know, with the 7 Years' War, just on the brink of history here. And so anytime you get a land claim dispute, you know has the potential to end bad. See what happens.
Presumably, there was an awkward moment where they ran into each other. Then the Spanish showed up and told the French that a couple hundred years earlier, the Pope drew a line on a map and said all of this belongs to Portugal and all of this belongs to Spain, and that the island was in Spain's territory and they would like the French to hand over their settlement. Now, since the two were good friends and Spain was willing to pay in cash money, the French obliged. But since they were still a little bitter about the recent 7 Years' War thing, they made sure to warn the Spanish not to let those dirty English on the other side of the island take over. So Spain went over to the English and explained, Pope, line on map, Spain's island, and they...
Now you'd have to think at this point, England and France, okay, they're not taking the Pope's pure authority on this. I mean, the line of demarcation, the little line that they drew back there, that was meant for land claims between Spain and Portugal, because those were the first two European nations that got much success with overseas ventures, right? So after you had Columbus's success, and then with Vasco da Gama for Portugal, and then again Columbus for the Spanish there, you had all these different land claims, and the line of demarcation was meant to try to settle that, where basically the west would belong to Spain, the east would sort of belong to Portugal. Now, that doesn't take into account the locals that live there, and of course those things, but generally speaking, that's what was supposed to happen. But the 1700s, I mean, the line of demarcation was back late 15th century, and this is the 1700s. It's been a long time, and although France and Britain weren't part of that first kind of wave of the explorers that started conquering, that was, of course, the Spanish and the Portuguese. You see in the 1700s a completely different game. The Spanish and the Portuguese are almost out of the picture by this point, and the Spanish, though, are not even close to what they once were, especially as compared to the British and the French. So this is an interesting thing of what will happen with the Spanish. What role can they actually play in this?
The English said, yeah, right, this is our island, but the Spanish had more guns, so they kicked them off anyway. But then England threatened to go to war, so Spain went to their friends in France and said, hey, it looks like stuff is about to go down. You in on this? And the French Minister of War said, yeah, and we'll launch a full-scale invasion of England and party like it's 1066.
Whoa!
But then King Louis XV said, 1, you're insane, and 2, you're fired. Sorry, Spain, we're not ready for a war right now. So Spain had to give the English their settlement back, saying it's still our island, and the English said, no, it's our island. Then some colonists in North America got a bit rowdy, so the English had to leave their settlement to go focus on that, but they left behind a plaque that said this is totally still our island. So the island was in Spanish hands, but then a French guy, that one, turned on the Spanish, took over most of the country, and captured King Ferdinand VII. And in response, the Spanish colonies in South America started vying for independence. So Spain had a little bit on its hands and also had to leave the islands. And for a couple decades,
Spain's empire is starting to kind of collapse, right? They do have a ton of obviously colonial possessions out west, especially in South America, where the dominant force, although the Portuguese with Brazil, but this is much longer than those original ventures. So yeah, I mean, how are they going to be able to defend this island, the Falklands, when in reality there are far more pressing matters for the Spanish? This little, not seemingly great islands at this time, probably not a major priority for the Spanish.
Islands were left uninhabited except for the penguins, some fishermen, and the gauchos, which are basically like cowboys but cooler and Spanisher.
Yeah.
A merchant from Hamburg living in the
Gauchos,
now
very cool.
independent United Provinces of the Rio de la Plata heard about the feral cattle roaming the Falklands and thought it would be a good way to make some money. So he got permission from both Buenos Aires and the British government to set up trade there as a private venture. Some American ships came down and began hunting whales and seals around the islands, and Vernet wasn't too happy about it. So he asked Buenos Aires for some military assistance in defending the islands, but Buenos Aires said, meh,
Yeah,
do
they're
it
not-
yourself.
what are they
Gave
gonna
him some
do?
weapons and appointed him governor of the islands. So he seized the US ships and arrested their crews. In response, two things happened. First, America came down and said, nice settlement you have there. Would be a shame if someone destroyed it. And then they destroyed it.
America.
Second, Britain heard Vernet had been appointed governor, meaning the United Provinces,
Brand new baby
actually now
America,
the Argentine Confederation, were officially claiming the islands as theirs. So Britain showed up and said, hey, didn't you see our plaque? And since they had more guns, they kicked them off the island. And the Falklands remained firmly in British hands for the next century. They
Argentines
officially
had no
became a
chance
crown
at this
colony in
time.
1840. Port Stanley became the island's capital in 1845. The cattle hides from the island weren't worth much, so they imported sheep from Britain in 1851. 2 world wars came and went, and all this time the Argentinians never rescinded their claim over the islands. Now it's
They still
1976,
feel
and
safe.
after a couple civil wars, a new brutal military dictatorship sponsored by the US fight against communism has taken control in Argentina.
Thanks, America.
And by 1981, this guy was in power. The economy had been struggling for a long time, and Galtieri had been unable to improve the situation.
Argentine economy is an interesting story because Argentina is a nation with vast natural resources. I mean, they really do. I mean, possibly on level with almost any developed nation like the United States and things like that. But they didn't industrialize, and that's going to be kind of coming up here. But and with that, they kept towards doing a lot of exporting as well, exporting goods, but not industrializing as much. A lot of raw good materials, especially with like beef and minerals and things like that. But not industrializing. When so many others were, has kind of put the Argentine economy kind of in that lower tier in a way as compared to other economic powerhouses, and choosing to do more of their exporting of raw materials rather than manufacture a lot of products themselves. Kept good relationships maybe with other nations with trade, but it didn't benefit them as much. So the Argentine economy has always probably underperformed in a way when you look at what possibly could have been.
Now, if you ever find yourself the brutal military leader of a struggling South American country and you start getting into hot water, here's a bit of advice that has been tried and tested throughout the century.
What is it?
Start a war to distract everyone from their misery.
Oh,
Galtieri
okay.
knew how popular he would be if he could finally take back Argentina's last Malvinas from the occupying British. There had
Malvinas is
been
what they
proposals
call
to
it
cut
in,
British military spending,
Argentina.
and the ice patrol vessel HMS Endurance had been withdrawn from the area. So the Argentinians assumed the British may not even bother doing anything about the invasion. After easily capturing the largely uninhabited South Georgia island,
Okay.
600
Looks
Argentine
positive for the
troops were sent to
Argentines
the
here.
Falklands. The small number of Royal Marines and other British forces stationed there put up a small amount of resistance, but in the end had to surrender to the larger Argentine
Okay.
force. Crowds in Argentina celebrated the news, but they were wrong
It's all
to assume the
distraction,
British
right?
would do nothing, because the person in charge of the United Kingdom at the time was this lady. Thatcher was a somewhat controversial prime minister, but whether you loved her or hated her, there was no denying that she was tough. Like metal. Iron, for example. She immediately declared an exclusion zone around the islands and organized for a task force of over 100 ships to set sail for the Falklands.
taking it very
the United
seriously,
Nations
British
expressed
here.
concern at the Argentine invasion. All South American nations apart from Chile backed Argentina. And since the United States had propped up the Argentine dictatorship, Reagan went to Thatcher and said, could you maybe just let them have the islands? And Thatcher said no. Okay, here, have some weapons. Fighting a war
All
over
right.
8,000 miles from home was a logistical challenge for the British. They requisitioned civilian cruise ships and containers, and they used British-owned Ascension Island as a forward base. By the time they arrived at the Falklands in May, the Argentine forces had had time to entrench themselves. The first task for the British was to gain control of the seas, which they did easily. On the 2nd of May, a British submarine sank an Argentine cruiser. The sinking was controversial, as it occurred outside the British exclusion zone. It was also the largest loss of life in a single incident during the war. And in response, the Argentine Navy withdrew from the islands. The next task for the British was to gain air superiority. While the Argentine Air Force controlled the skies, they were able to
really
inflict
shouldn't be a match
considerable
for the
damage
British,
on the
though.
Royal Navy below. Days after the sinking of the General Belgrano, 2 Argentine super-étendards carried out a raid on the HMS Sheffield and sank it with an Exocet missile. For weeks, the Argentine Air Force would continue to carry out raids and inflict heavy casualties on the Royal Navy, with British Sea Harriers doing their best to take out as many of the Argentine aircraft as they could. While the battle in the skies raged on, San Carlos was chosen as the best landing site for the British ground forces. An SAS raid took out Argentine defenses on Pebble Island, and the HMS Alacrity sailed through Falklands Sound to flush out any Argentine supply.
You just in the big picture of things, you can't like I mean, you're gonna have a hard time betting on the Argentine military against the British military, right? I mean, there's some patriotism definitely being fought with here, and a lot of pride. But when it comes down to it, when you look at this, I mean, a prolonged war between Argentina and the British, especially when it comes to military technology, is going to be quite the challenge here for the Argentines here. So you can see probably this starting to play out.
Ships. The landings began on May 21st, with Argentine aircraft carrying out full-scale raids on the task force ships taking part in the landing, damaging several and sinking a few. But anti-aircraft cannons and Sea Harriers shot down many of the aircraft in what became a major turning point for air superiority, and a beachhead was successfully formed. Then the ground troops began their movements out of San Carlos, across the north towards Stanley, and south toward the Argentine stronghold at Goose Green. In the following battles, a clear trend emerged. The Argentine conscripts put up a good fight, and with the rough, muddy terrain, the war was by no means easy for the British, but with highly skilled Royal Marine commanders and parachute regiment troops, the British would often find themselves taking on larger numbers of Argentinian soldiers, but would still come out victorious with minimal casualties. The 14-hour-long battle for Goose Green commenced on the night of May 28th. The battle ended in a decisive British victory, with over 900 Argentinians surrendering. Then, with 5,000 reinforcements arriving from the 5th Infantry Brigade, the British started preparing for their final assault on Stanley. In a series of hard-fought battles, they took control of the hills and mountains surrounding the town, as the Argentine forces withdrew, with British ships shelling their positions from offshore. Utterly surrounded, on the 14th of June, the Argentinians surrendered, and the war was over. The 2-month-long war claimed hundreds of lives, and left the islands...
Let's just take a look at the statistics. So you can see things basically doubled on the side of the Argentines here, trying to defend this island. Okay.
Strewn with minefields that still pose a problem to this day. Argentina still claims the islands, but in 2013 a referendum was held, and the islanders voted 99.8% in favor of remaining British. Plus, oil...
Let's go back to that. That's some...
referendum was held, and the islanders voted 99.8% in...
Okay, so... Alright, so you see this, if the question... Argentina... A lot of Argentines claim these islands, and you look at a referendum about the sovereignty of the Falklands. You see it just, completely in favor for the people being under British rule than Argentine rule. So, a lot of people say sovereignty is supposed to be the real indicator of where independence should lie. Not the only thing, but probably the thing that people look to most for legitimacy when you come to that. And you can see right there. It's pretty about as one-sided as it can possibly be.
In favor of remaining British. Plus, oil was just found near the islands, so the British probably aren't going to give them up anytime soon.
Yep. Yeah. Oil, modern era, right? Trump that. Nothing trumps that. So with that there, I know this conflict kind of gets talked about, not that much. You're definitely going to hear it much more from the Argentine perspective, as it's one of their kind of foreign issues that they still have today, with a lot of them cleaning it, even though it looks like, just from those last statistics, that the locals definitely want to stay under British rule. But when you're now getting further and further away from the imperial era, you maybe make a claim that way for the Argentines with this land claim they have on the Falklands. But as long as there's an economic value of these islands, you're probably going to see the British there, right? The economy and just financial gains that come from this modern era of imperialism, that's kind of what it can look like, is such a powerful force, of course, even today. And probably nothing changes here for a while. So anyway, good little episode there on kind of the wars over the Falkland Islands and some of the history there, going back a long time, as you saw, basically centuries. But it's still a very modern issue, just within the current generation, and will probably still be discussed a lot more going forward as well. So, all right. Well, thank you to all of you that recommended that. That was a good little kind of short and sweet little recap on the issues here with the Falkland Islands. Once again, make sure you visit the original video. Leave any comments. I love hearing your comments about anything. I'm always open if there's something you have to add, or something maybe I've said that I'm up to correction. I'm totally down for that. So keep the discussions positive, and keep them going, and we'll continue to go on this journey of scouring the internet for learning more and more about history, and I hope it's fun for you as it is for me. So all right, with that, we'll see you all next time.